What is Transcendent Love Integration? Well, it could be described in a lot of different ways. It derived from a deep understanding of mythology, especially in yoga, and uses Vedic yoga techniques with a feeling approach, getting closer to real need. And it could also be described as, in neurological terms, as a communication between what's called the conscious agency self, who you think you are in the drama of your life, day to day, and along with all of the memories of the you that actually has been changing all along, and the brain, which knows what you're going to decide before you're conscious of deciding it. That is attached very strongly to some mythologies in Vaishnava Hinduism. But it's also a neurological study. Now, another aspect of Transcendent Love Integration is our connection to virtue. And what's virtue based on? Well, this process doesn't talk about things that you have to believe for which there's no proof. It's based on the things that created our social brain, the things that helped us meet our needs and the needs of others. And in the social brain, the way that we don't just meet our needs but the needs of others involves three basic perspectives. One is empathy. And so motivations that involve mainly empathy are all about caring about yourself and other people. And the virtue from that is goodness. Another way that we reach out beyond our limited sense of self is objectivity, that perspective. When that's your main perspective when you're communicating, what that does is give you a real sense of what reality is. Trustworthy facts. The virtue attached to this is truth. Okay? Very important connections for us. There's another. That connection is with our ability to be creative. Now, creativity, a lot of people talk about that when they write or when they paint or whatever. They talk about having a muse. The mystery of the muse is actually the brain. And when we're being creative, we are engaging the brain. We are exciting it, working with it to come up with new perspectives, different ways of approaching things. What do you get from this practice, this perspective? You get art, which I declare to be a virtue. Art is the way that we appreciate life, ourselves, and others. that appreciation is central to meeting human needs, both for others and ourselves. Now, the process of transcendent love integration is an attempt to comfort yourself in an internal dialogue and practice, an inner communion, if you will, between yourself and yourself, using your imagination. And using the three basic approaches in Vedic yoga, which is concentration, or dhyana yoga, your breath, prana yoga, and sound, or mantra yoga. Now, that's very ritualized in yoga, and in this process it's not. Any use of sound, breath, or concentration is considered valuable. And what that does, it puts you in touch with your more bodily experience of life, because you're focusing on the sensations in yourself. A lot of times there's not enough communication there. We don't pay attention. A lot of times because of anxiety. If you're anxious, you eat too much, because you're shoveling it in quicker than the body can respond and give you a message. It's this lack of connecting to yourself in this way, kind of bad for your health. The other connections, which use your imagination more, is three internal dialogues. That dramatic self in you, which I call the kid, that experiences things more directly in an emotional sense, communicating with others in an empathetic way, back and forth, because whatever role you take is actually still you, because you're playing it. So it's a communication actually with empathy. When we communicate to others and to ourselves with empathy. And that's helpful with the virtue of goodness. Now, the communication using empathy is important, but so is the approach using objectivity, where we don't believe everything that we think. It's important to realize that taking an objective or understanding approach to ourselves is another kind of love. It's said, for instance, that fathers love with their teaching, and mothers with their heart. Well, they both do both, but both of those things are important. So that mythology is very useful. When we're communicating, and that's, as I say, communicating with objectivity about what you feel in the moment, what you expect, in an objective way, you being your own counselor, communicating back and forth between your more feeling self and your more rational, objective self. So this is all about integrating the love that comes from objectivity, just as communicating with empathy helps us to feel more loved as well. Now, communicating with creativity, that's big time involved with the imagination. It's the ability to take different perspectives in order to feel differently and see what that's like. It means getting out of the box of who and what you think you are, and creating a sense of a different you, and a different view that you might take. So this communication, I call it communication between the kid in you and the artist, the creative part of you, that can create experiences for you, recreate experiences that you had, and help you to realize the communications that you're having but not knowing about. And this helps us to, all of these practices help us to integrate ourselves in a way that embraces these virtues. These are the virtues of love. None of these things operate well if you don't use them together. The best way is to take these powers inside yourself and use all of them, and not let any of them stifle the voice of the others. Because if you do, you're not well-rounded. It's like not having a well-rounded meal. You need to have all of these perspectives. And when you do, then you embrace these virtues. There is another thing that occurs when you do all of these things together, especially within an hour, or extend it, that hour to up to 3. That would be called an intensive practice. The interesting thing about this is that if you're doing it, you wear away your symbolic self. Let me describe what I mean by the symbolic self and why it's there. The symbolic you is the part of you that seeks for symbolic need. Money, power, a brand new car, etc. Symbolic of what? That's the question. Because obviously these things are somewhat useful, but symbolic of what? The false sense of need, the insatiable need. Where does this come from? Symbolic need cannot fulfill yourself. Can't fulfill. You never reach a point of satiation. But real need, you can. So why do your real needs become symbolized? Because this is how you end up being more symbolic than you are real. More a puppet of your environment instead of the independent, free you. How does that happen? Well, it happens because of trauma. Trauma, which can also include long-term deprivation, affects us in a very negative sort of way. Since you feel helpless to meet needs in these circumstances, those needs become symbolized, and so you end up, why did they become symbolized? Because there's this level of anxiety that becomes intolerable to your system. That your brain goes, this is making my body and myself, it's making me sick. There's no me in the brain. But this is veering toward sickness. This is veering toward possible death. So, in order to ease this anxiety, symbolic need comes to replace it. I'm not saying that any of this is easy to do, and I'm not saying you snap your fingers and you've done it, or that you can do it in an hour or a week or a year. This is a lifestyle where you get better and better. It ends up that as you do these things and form more, and while you're doing it, you're seeking for comfort. You're not looking for negative things. This is what demarks this as something quite different than what you usually see in psychology and in some religions. It is not a thing that seeks pain. It's something that seeks comfort. And as that comfort occurs from different perspectives, what happens is the symbolic defenses against that original helplessness get broken down. Now, if you're safe in the present and you relive because you've broken down the symbols that kept you from feeling what happened to you, that helplessness long ago, when you feel that helplessness in association with real need, what happens is that you unlearn that helplessness. And you realize something, that this symbolic need that controlled your life and enslaved you was based on something that is now a loss. It's already happened. Damage done. It was a loss. So when you realize that what's at the root of your symbolic need, when you realize the real need, because you've done this process enough and long enough, then what happens? You find out the real need because you felt the helplessness that shrouded it and kept you from being able to feel it. So as you unlearn that helplessness and realize the real need, you understand that it's now a loss. What does that do for you? It means that when you realize your loss, you can grieve that and let it go. Let it go into the past. Now, after you let it go into the past, guess what? Then is when you're able to truly forgive yourself and others from your heart. Anybody that had something to do with that loss. And the beautiful thing about the forgiveness is, and that doesn't mean you trust either yourself or others too much. It means that you've let go of a kind of fear and hatred and the need to punish. You've gotten past that. You've forgiven. And once you've forgiven, that's when you're stronger in relationship to those particular needs. That's when you're able to see the most terrible thing, which is when the hurt in you, that helplessness around needs, feelings, and so on, that greed and power mongering or whatever your problem was, you realize how that hurt other people. You realize, and why is it so hard to feel that? Because it means that you were a monster of sorts. At some level, you were a monster. And so, that's the hardest thing of all to feel. But the beauty is, when you have felt that, you begin a process of remorse. And when you feel that remorse, hey, congratulations. You're no longer the person who did that. To some degree. You're no longer that person. You are changing. This is the process of change. And it's not easy. And once you realize how hard it is, it makes you more tolerant about other people. Because you know they can't change quickly. And guess what? It doesn't happen because of willpower. So that's that do with your concept of law. Very interesting. Law should be more about protecting society and healing people as much as you can. That's the real basis. Punishment should never be the issue. And of course, you heard that from Jesus. And a lot of the great religious leaders, to be honest. Now, when you understand how hard this is, it's easy to have more tolerance of yourself and others, and it does something a little more than that. It brings you to the point where in this tolerance, in this realization that you don't change by willpower. That's the biggest lie. Willpower will not change you. You can wear down the defenses, and you can will to do that, but the power of that will is dependent on how successful you are over time, and maybe you need some help from someone else before you can get there. So willpower alone, it doesn't help. It's you're more guilty for the things that you failed to do to be a better person than you are for what you've done. Very interesting perspective, don't you think? But when you realize that, then it's very important. You only get change by wearing down the defenses against it. It's just like exercise. It's something you hate to do, but you like to have done it. Important, right? And the more you have done it, the more you're inclined to do it. So it's the same thing with this process. The last thing anybody wants to do is feel the helplessness that once was an endangerment to their life. So you wear down the defenses trying to comfort yourself, not seeking pain, because then you're going to get all defensive. Or you have a very skilled therapist who can trick you and knows when you're close to a particular reliving and can then trick you into it, give you just that amount of nudge. And that's a skill that has to be worked on, highly developed, and it can be trained. So this is the presentation that I made. I call it Transcendent Love Integration. There's one more thing. The more you integrate, the more you realize several things. One is that when you become more virtuous, you actually become more selfless. You're not as concerned about just yourself, and more expansively concerned about yourself, yes, but others and the world. And this is what's called a progressive mind. Do you want to be progressive? The great Neil deGrasse Tyson said he wanted on his tombstone the idea that everyone should strive to make the world a better place and be ashamed to die without having tried. Something, that's a paraphrase. That is a truly great man. His insights go on forever. And he's probably a genius. But what we're looking at here is something that everybody can do. And I challenge you to do it. And when I'm talking about a church, a humanist church, talking about a church that's about process, about change, it's about love for yourself and others, using objectivity, creativity, and empathy, and an awareness of who you are at a very deep level. Mind, body, and soul. And it's about process. It's not about beliefs. It's about trust in processes that seem to work. And if you find a better one, as the Buddha said, a fella can say he has a way, or a fella, I mean, girl or boy. Can that be used for both? I think so. Nowadays. But anyway, can say, I have a way. That individual cannot say, I have a way. I have the only way. How would you know? So, the idea of a guru who's perfect and who's going to guide you somewhere, that's fake. The only real guru or teacher is all of us working together in love, and that's something we're growing into, hopefully, as a human race. So, there's more to this, and you can feel free to email me or call the number that you find on transcendentloveintegration.org. So, I hope this has been an inspiration to you. And as Neil deGrasse Tyson said, it's not about gaining any glory or power. It's about each of us doing all that we can, even though we'll probably be forgotten as a partial source of that. Who cares? That's self-transcendence. This process also guides you to the point that you realize there's no permanent, unchanging self from Buddhism. You could be just about anybody from Vaishnava Hinduism, right? And you're kind of everybody. Empathy from Christianity. And trust. A big emphasis in Islam. In a sense, divinity in this process is about those things that make us less selfish through objectivity, more expansive in our perspectives on who and what we can be, our creativity, and more connected to everybody through empathy, so that we are all one. And so, connection to these virtues would be called divinity in this system. That is divinity. What you believe is outside of that, beyond that, or whatever, for which you feel you have or do not have any proof, that doesn't matter. Work on that divinity that you know. As Jesus said, when the people were asking if, they wanted to see God, he says, "You've seen me, you've seen the Father." He was speaking as those virtues, identifying with them. If you've seen these virtues, you've seen divinity. And there's no room for I in teamwork. So humility is very important. So if someone comes to you and they say, "I want to be your guru," run away. If someone comes and says, "I have an idea, let's test this. It seems to have worked for me," well, make up your mind. Would you like to try it or not? And if you do, then maybe we'll all discover more truth together. I don't know what to say, except that love really is what makes the human world go round. It's working together. And when you've balanced the powers of all of these virtues, not taking away the voice from any one of them, which divides the power that you have in life, guess what? You avoid tyranny. Tyranny is what? It doesn't come to you saying, "Hey, here I am, tyranny. I want to teach you how to hate." It comes in the form of a virtue that's isolated, a mind that's isolated. If you've conquered tyranny, you've achieved the greatest virtue of all, freedom. Not license. I can do anything I want. No. Freedom. Freedom from tyranny. Anyway, that's my message for today. I hope that you've thought about it, or will think about it. I'm looking forward to your comments, of course. Take care.